It all started with a fly on a wall. As the young writer for Marvel Comics, Stan Lee, is stuck finding his next superhero, he looks up at the fly. He sits there and wonders to himself, hey, what if I can get a superhero that would stick to walls and crawl on them? Man, that would be groovy. He quickly heads to work to see his publisher with his next idea, but it gets rejected. Disappointed, he gets back to work. Yet with his mind still stuck on this character, he couldn't help it. So in 1962, he created the superhero Spider-Man in the Amazing Fantasy Comics and sent it off into the public. Time goes by. The young writer sits in his office working. His publisher rushes in and says, Stan, you remember that character we both loved so much? Spider-Man? Let's do it as a series. Of course, the rest is history. Spider-Man grew with fame after one comic book to another. He would later have his own cartoon series, movies, and video games. One of the biggest success from these categories I want to talk about was how the gaming industry brought us the best Spider-Man gaming experience today. So let's take a step back, true believers, and find out how it was done. A while back in the 80s, Spider-Man games weren't all that big as anyone would believe. In 1982, the first Spider-Man game would be featured on the Atari 2600, developed by the Parker brothers, an 8-bit game that starred Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, while you swing from building to deactivate Goblin's bombs. This style of gameplay resembled the arcade game Donkey Kong. In 1984, the next Spider-Man game would be Scott Adams' Quest Probe featuring Spider-Man, which was a series of graphical text adventures based on the comics. Mostly storytelling than actually playing the game. In 1989, Paragon Software would make The Amazing Spider-Man and Captain America in Dr. Doom's Revenge, the first side-scrolling action fighting game where you play as both Spider-Man and Captain America to take down Dr. Doom with fan-favorite villains. There was more of this arcade style throughout the games. It did really well during that time. During the 90s, the Spider-Man cartoons had become widely praised. This would start giving certain developers encouragement to make some new Spider-Man games. So in 1990, Oxford Digital Enterprises developed a puzzle platformer game named The Amazing Spider-Man, a 2D side-scroller that was kind of a sequel from the last game, as Spider-Man saves Mary Jane from Mysterio. While another company, Rare Limited, developed a separate Amazing Spider-Man on the Game Boy, becoming the first handheld Spider-Man game. After that, the 2D side-scroller was mostly used throughout the rest of the 90s, with Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six in 1992, Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage in 1994, while Spider-Man would also appear in Marvel Superheroes in 1995, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter in 97, and the legendary Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes in 98. During those times, more Spider-Man games were just designed around arcades. It was 1999, and the era of 3D gaming blew up on the scene. This new form of gaming would spawn an idea for Spider-Man. At Activision Studios, developers from Neversoft brought Spider-Man on his first 3D game. In 2000, Neversoft Spider-Man was released on the PlayStation, PC, and Nintendo 64. The game became a massive hit with the help of Activision and the engine of the PlayStation that made the Tony Hawk games. The graphics looked incredible for its time. Having a story with cinematic cutscenes, voice acting, 3D levels, combat, and web swinging. Even Stan Lee was featured to do narration for the game. It was the first attempt to bring a Spider-Man game onto 3D hardware, and it worked, while the icon would start to gain more attention. After Neversoft Spider-Man, in 2001, a sequel was released for the Game Boy Color by Vicarious Visions. Labeled Spider-Man 2 The Sinister Six, then followed up with Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace. This gathered positive reviews overall. After the Spider-Man animated series had ended, the wall crawler was barely around for anything to do, until 2002 when Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy would hit theaters. It left a lot on the table for merchandising, so Activision took the opportunity to create more Spider-Man games. The process of getting the film onto a video game was still under development. That's when Activision acquired Treyarch and a few more developers under their belt. Funny enough, Treyarch were the ones to develop the Call of Duty games, but their first game they worked on before Call of Duty was the 2002 Spider-Man the video game. The game had been based on the movie, while somehow they managed to get Tobey Maguire himself to reprise the role for Spider-Man and Peter Parker, and Willem Dafoe to voice Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin. The level design was similar to Neversoft's Spider-Man game, with 3D levels, battles against more villains and thugs, and open world to swing in New York. The game became an incredible hit and had better graphics centered around the 3D consoles. One big critique that was mentioned from the game was Spider-Man's web swinging. Even one of the developers, Jamie Freestorm, was in agreement, as he found it to be anemic, stiff, and unsatisfying. While there was no weight to the action, the character was shooting webs and sticking them from nowhere. So in 2004, the sequel Spider-Man 2, Freestorm created a physics engine to give Spider-Man that actual swing effect, falling from great heights with fast speeds and swinging forward with all the momentum. Even with this change, the people at Treyarch loved it, but others didn't, since the progress was to finish the game and not change directions from the core gameplay, though Treyarch had developed games with physics before, but they didn't sell much, so they had been distant with physics-based games for a while. Hilariously though, Freestorm was in charge to lead Spider-Man 2, and got his way to do the swinging physics. It wasn't an easy task, but they succeeded. They even improved the combat system, which gave them more freedom and fluid gameplay. They also included the spider sense ability within the game, alerting attacks that come your way so you can dodge to avoid them, and quickly attack. Once the game was released, it was an absolute hit for the fans. The game was positively well received, and captured the essence of Spider-Man swinging with the T, soon calling it the best Spider-Man game ever. In 2005, the next Spider-Man game would turn in a completely new direction, creating the Ultimate Spider-Man based on the Ultimate Marvel comic universe, where they developed the game without Freestorm. The game would also use cel shading, a comic book style of graphics and panels. The game would obviously star Spider-Man, but now you could play as Eddie Brock's Venom, while the similar swinging physics did return from Spider-Man 2. The game was very well received. Many loved the combat, the boss battles, storytelling, and voice acting, while some would say the side missions were a bit much, but overall enjoyable. In the same year, Spider-Man was featured in a fighting game published by EA Games called Marvel Nemesis: Rise of the Imperfects, alongside Marvel's superheroes, as you fight against the antagonists, the Imperfects. Really? What kind of name is that? Might as well call it Rise of the Bit. In 2006, Spider-Man would be playable in Marvel Ultimate Alliance, an action RPG developed by Raven Software, as a multiplayer game where you play as several Marvel superheroes. You can also upgrade them throughout the game and earn unlockable skins for each one. In 2007, the next Spider-Man game would conclude the Sam Raimi trilogy with Spider-Man 3 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. It was a big challenge to surpass the Spider-Man 2's game. It used the same mechanics from the sequel, but dumbed it down. The game was also remembered for the unintentionally funny QuickTime events. RIP, third Spider-Man game. The reception was mixed, and it wasn't something that passed the bar the sequel had made. It felt like a step backwards from their last Spidey game. In the same year, the next entry, Spider-Man Friend or Foe, was released, changing the formula completely. Instead of your standard open world swinging, the game was more grounded and linear as a co-op beat-em-up brawler, where Spider-Man fights and recruits villains, and they would join forces to uncover the true antagonist behind their abductions. Spider-Man also gets assistance from Nick Fury, the head of S.H.I.E.L.D., while you teleport through new areas and countries? I don't know. And reach the end of the level while having random encounters. The game had mixed reception. While some enjoyed this new experience, others didn't care much for it. Treyarch had been widely successful with their Call of Duty series, then Activision wanted them to develop another Spidey game. So they did just that in 2008 with Spider-Man: Web of Shadows. The mechanics were back and an open city now. The story revolves around Venom's symbiote that has infected all of New York City. In addition, they added choices within the game, giving players a path that they can choose, either taking the good path or the bad, and how it changes the outcome, teaming up with Marvel's superheroes or supervillains. In the game, Spidey can switch between his normal suit to the symbiote at any time. The regular suit gives you more speed and movement, as the symbiote gives you more strength. The combat is combo-based, bringing back older attacks from previous games, while introducing new ones with web attacks and reach. The reception, however, was very mixed, due to the story, the characters, the voice acting, and the repetitive missions in the game. Oh, and the QuickTime events were back, and unintentionally funnier. So this was about it for Treyarch, as they had games like Call of Duty to worry about, so it was time for another studio to try it out. The time came as the developers Beenox gave Spidey a try. By 2010, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions was next. Spidey in this game has a role to play in 4 dimensions, as 4 different types of Spider-Man. as your classic red and blue to futuristic Spidey of 2099, Ultimate Spider-Man with his symbiote, and vintage-style Spider-Noir. Levels were designed differently without the open-world setting, so there was less web swinging and more fighting with a touch of platforming, while each Spider-Man shares unique abilities of their own. Classic Spidey returns with his speed and quick movements. 2099 Spider-Man has all aerial attacks while using an ability to slow down the environment as you remain at your current speed. While Ultimate Spider-Man has his Rage mode to give him more strength and uses less web action. Spider-Noir uses his stealth as an advantage to sneak attack enemies. Each Spider-Man has their own villains and boss battles. The villains are similar to their comic book counterparts, but done very differently in each world. Players really liked this game. It was positively well received and had a different Spider-Man, making the experience unique and enjoyable. The downside to Spider-Noir was being compared as a Batman Arkham Asylum ripoff and became overshadowed. With the great reviews for Shattered Dimensions, it allowed Beenox to stay working on the next Spider-Man game. They had planned a sequel the following year. In 2011, Spider-Man Edge of Time was developed. The game shared its concept of using a different Spider-Man, except they used two versions in this game, starring the Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man of 2099. The gameplay was like Beenox's original game, but heavily uses the plot as its main target. Both Spideys have to work together to change the past and alter their future. The game was an overall mixed bunch in the end. Many people liked its narrative, but found the gameplay repetitive and not all engaging, almost simplifying it from their last game. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4 was unfortunately scrapped. After some time had gone by, in 2012, the reboot starring Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man was released in theaters, so Activision still had the rights to publish a Spider-Man game, and Beenox decided to shift their focus to a game adaptation of the film. It was their first attempt at an open world. Their take on web swinging had a much closer action with Spider-Man in a third-person view. They also implemented a first-person view to allow players to see the environment and select where they want to swing next. The combat was massively changed to have the Arkham style of gameplay. The story takes place right after the movie's plot, where Spider-Man stopped the Lizard and saved Dr. Connors. What became disappointing about this game was the open world itself. There wasn't really much freedom to do anything, and only acted like a hub world to find small objectives to complete. It doesn't have the sense of exploration to encourage players to play the game. A big change would then occur as Activision and Marvel's partnership had ended, meaning Activision had concluded publishing Spider-Man games. Before departing, they had promised to release one more Spider-Man game in 2014, with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, serving as a sequel to the last game. This time the open world was fitted to their liking, where the swinging was much better, and having actual missions in the world. You even had a choice on how to act in certain situations. Except this was their worst game out of their last entries. The story wasn't good, the camera and movements felt bad, and you clipped in a lot of areas. It was really sad to hear how they had one last chance, but ended up disappointing a lot of people in the end. Now with Disney gaining the rights to Spider-Man, a lot has changed. No one knew what would be the next Spider-Man game. Would it ever happen? Or was this it? Until E3 2016.
No pressure, right?
That's right, he was back. This time Sony Interactive Entertainment would publish the game, while Insomniac Games would develop the brand new Spider-Man game for the PS4, famous for their Spiral trilogy, Sunset Overdrive, and the Ratchet & Clank series. When the game was revealed, none of us knew what the gameplay was going to be like, even though Insomniac Games confirmed what we saw was really in-game and running on the PS4. When the actual game was shown, everyone's socks flew off. Just seeing how Spider-Man swings, taking out bad guys with ease, using combos, finishers, aerial combat, and gadgets with webs. The game even showed a glimpse of the antagonists. As the release of the game grew closer, so did the reveal of Spider-Man's iconic villains. Of course, the game was an incredible hit, showing the satisfaction of web swinging, new abilities to unlock, a skill tree to upgrade Spidey's attacks, and so much more. The game did a perfect job of, dare I say it, making you feel like Spider-Man. With the success of the new game, they even announced a remastered version for the PS5 and the PC, a spin-off with Miles Morales, and a sequel on its way right now. It is astonishing seeing how this game was revolutionized throughout the years. With its ups and downs, all it took was the right people to make the game. That's honestly a big W for everyone. As for me, I'm excited to see what the sequel will bring.